just thinking about all the crimes that happened to like we don't talk about.
um, well, I mean, we're live now. Maybe now's a good time to talk about them.
Yeah. Well, well, like I remember I was at this I was at this thing. It was like supposed to be like re-entry for people who are coming out of prison, and uh, they were like trying to tell all the people who got out of prison that like every single problem they have is because they have maladaptive thinking. That's the term they use, and they're like,
Oh,
well,
yes.
and they're like, well, like when we go to work though, like we have the bosses usually tell us to do something that's illegal or even against the own company policy. Like, what do we do in that situation? And they kept dodging that. They're like, no, that stuff doesn't happen. You just got maladaptive thinking.
Yes,
Um,
maladaptive thinking. That's why there are fewer jobs than people who need them, and none of them pay enough to
mhm.
cover your rent and your groceries in the same week. Um, yeah. All right. Sorry, I was just texting Abe there. I don't know why he's calling. He's supposed to be on. Um, so, yes. Yeah, I don't have any other crimes that I can think of offhand that we need to discuss at the moment. Although maybe this one, I don't know if it's counts as a crime or not, but we're going to talk about this cooperative governance research initiative report. I don't know. It's a misdemeanor maybe that they did the survey, the research for this in 2021, and it's only being published now in April of 2024. So we're a couple months late getting to it, but did take 3 years. But thanks to Courtney Berner and Dr. Yanni Liang and everybody else who helped put this together, including by answering the questions. I'm glad to have it. It is a couple years old at this point, at least the data is, but I think there's still a lot of good stuff in here. We can just start out looking at the executive summary here, kind of give us a little bit of an idea of what's in store. Let's see. So they surveyed 73 worker co-ops, so got a pretty good survey in 2021. And they're looking specifically at governance and different types of co-ops. So we're looking at boards of worker co-ops here specifically. So worker co-op boards of directors are younger and more diverse across gender, race, and ethnicity than all other co-op respondents. However, compared to the 2021 economic census of worker co-ops and democratic workplaces, female directors are underrepresented, and non-binary directors are slightly overrepresented in our sample of worker co-ops. So that's an interesting little statistic for us. Approximately half of participating worker co-ops elect a board, meaning that the other half, just all the members would be on the board. There wouldn't be an election, which is common for a lot of smaller worker co-ops. Among them, only 15% have a nominating committee compared to 71% of all CGRI respondents. So, a little more direct democracy in worker co-ops than other types of co-ops. A larger proportion of worker co-ops allow outside directors than all of the other co-op respondents. 33% versus 17%. So I was kind of interested to see that they actually had a third of worker co-ops at least allow for somebody who's not a member of the co-op to be on the board. I know that's something that I've heard people talk about, a few co-ops, for the benefit of just having somebody else with knowledge, and they might be a non-voting member, but still on the board. But yeah, more than I would have thought. Contested board elections are less common in worker co-ops, and 61% of worker co-ops reported holding no contested board elections in the past 3 years. Makes sense. Generally, I don't think often I could see there's probably not more than one person who actually wants to do it, or that somebody's just being voluntold to be the manager. Participating worker co-ops provide director training in meeting facilitation, conflict resolution, and social responsibility, sustainability, and social impact at a higher rate than all of the other co-op respondents. Board evaluations are not common among worker co-ops. Approximately half reported never evaluating individual directors or the board as a whole, which is kind of interesting, maybe unsurprising. Worker co-op boards that held more frequent and shorter meetings than other co-op respondents, and more than half of respondents indicated that the right amount of time was spent on topics including performance strategy and member relations. Also makes sense, in a worker co-op, you're going to be having regular meetings with your people as compared to like consumer co-ops or producer co-ops. More than half of participating worker co-ops do not have a CEO or a highest ranking employee. All right, go us. 45% that do are larger in terms of membership size, revenue, and the number of full-time equivalent employees. But 55% have, a small enough degree of hierarchy that there's nobody that is officially the highest ranking person. Board compensation beyond base salary is uncommon among worker co-ops compared to other sectors. You got to do it for the love. And approximately half of participating worker co-ops believe their board builds positive social and interpersonal dynamics. This is kind of the high level overview. Before we get into the details, just talk about their methods a little bit. So, and I'm sorry, this is probably boring for a lot of people, but I'm a stats nerd. So, and I used to do phone surveys for the Bureau of Economic Research. So, kind of into this stuff. And this first number is I was very impressed with. The study included a cross-sectional survey with N equals 500. So they had 500 people who they surveyed. Like it's like a lot of people. And then they did semi-structured interviews with 21 people. So they took a small subset of the people who completed the survey and did an interview with them. But 500 people completing a survey is rather impressive. You want to, just jump in at any time, Chris. Feel free to interrupt. So, and here's where everybody comes from. The co-ops that they surveyed, you see a lot of the country got missed. Nobody where I'm at. A lot of the Midwest and the Southwest kind of got overlooked or not properly surveyed, or we didn't get anybody to respond. By far the most in Wisconsin, not surprising. This is a University of Wisconsin Center for Cooperative Survey, so that's probably to be expected. And then Massachusetts, New York, and California, other three hotspots where we had 6 or 7 co-ops responding. So this is also probably a pretty good map to get an idea of where worker co-ops are. There's definitely a lot of, this isn't, by density, not exact, but definitely looking at the orange and red states, you're going to find a lot of co-ops there. We'll go down here. So the size of worker co-ops, as we know, tend to be pretty small. The minimum number, they have worker co-op with only 2 people, which might question whether or not that counts as a co-op, but maximum of 220. We can guess that might be cooperative home care associates, if I had to take an educated guess. Mean number of employees, 17. Median is 8. Mean, for a refresher on statistics, that is the average, just the total number of worker owners divided by the total number of businesses. And the median is right in the middle. Half have more than that, half have fewer. So about 8 is about average, or is about normal, rather. And we had their maximum revenue. I was impressed by this number as well, $46 million. So the largest worker co-op that they talked to by revenue was bringing in $46 million a year. Not bad. And So here's an interesting chart. So of all the co-ops that participated in the survey, here's when they were established. By far the most between 2010 and 2019. And then a big drop off, which is now this report is, the data came out in 2020, or they collected the data in 2021. So this 2020s is only 2 years of the 2020s. But still, even if, we said, okay, every 2 years, we're going to have 6 new co-ops, that's only 30 that would be in that decade, which would still be a slower pace than the 2010s. I think this is obviously because of 2008 crisis.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's when a lot of people started looking for alternatives and coming across worker co-ops. I was amongst them. And then we do have some going all the way back to the 70s, actually, more than I would think. Like I probably, if I try really hard, I might be able to name 5 co-ops that I think started in the 70s. But so that's pretty good. Let's see. So the people responding to the survey, about a third were CEOs. Most were directors or just other, biggest category, other, just a worker owner.
Did it say that somewhere that others could be worker owner?
Oh, well, so they're all worker owners. Everybody
Okay.
who was interviewed is a member of a co-op.
Okay.
So if they're other, they just say, they're not a CEO, a director, an assistant to the CEO, or a board admin. So gender and racial composition, again, this is, I think it shows us where in the survey methodology, and I'm not trying to criticize UWCC. I understand very well how incredibly difficult these are to put together, but a lot of times when you look at the data, it's like, wow, we really missed, some demographic categories. So 7% of worker co-op respondents identify as Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish. 7. That is incredibly low. Like, that's way low. For instance, the largest worker co-op, or at least one of them now, the CHCA, Cooperative Home Care Associates, largely Latino women, definitely like women of color, and a lot of Spanish-speaking women. So it's kind of surprising. Like, we have a lot of co-ops, a lot of Latinx and Hispanic co-ops that. So only 7%. That seems way low. It's definitely way low. When you look at the demographics of the country as a whole, we're about, I think, a quarter Hispanic. So that says something. I don't know, maybe about language. I wonder if they had Spanish-speaking surveyors, or the survey in Spanish. That would be a question I would want, but I would think that we'd want to get that number up considerably. Respondents' racialized identification as follows: 76% white, again, too high. I would think both in terms of just the overall demographics of the country as a whole, but then also the worker co-op movement. I remember seeing a number of years ago, now probably 6 or 7, that the 80% of worker co-ops that had been formed in the last 5 years were predominantly people of color. So I think that number is probably too high. Again, not sure what that says about survey methodology. It could mean a lot of things. 8% Black or African American, 5% Asian, 4% Middle Eastern. So again, I would think underrepresentation there. I would suspect that more than 8% of worker co-ops are predominantly African American worker owners, although I'm totally just kind of educated guessing that. Numbers are hard to come by, and these are some of the only ones we got. So anyway, but that, kind of full disclosure, that's who we're talking to. Let's see. Anything else? On average, respondents have worked at their co-op for 8 years. although tenure ranges from less than a year to 46 years,
I,
which,
yeah, and that stuff is also. I mean, the racial stuff is difficult too because I mean we're in a period where there's just like a lot of people don't really know what they are. I mean, a lot
Mhm,
of like race has been obscured, ethnicity, genealogy, all this has been obscured. Um,
mhm.
so when I'm looking at this too, like Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish, I'm thinking, well, does that mean like people from Spain and Italy? But then there's also some people who are like, oh,
Well,
well, that's
not
probably
Italy.
people who
It didn't say
might be
Italian,
considered
just Spanish.
mestizos and well, look, it
Mhm.
says a Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish.
Right, yeah, yeah.
Latino, well, that Latino covers a lot of things. And
Mhm.
then
Although
Hispanic and Spanish, those can be redundant terms. All the
mhm,
terminology is goofy.
yeah,
Not in the country, and in the
right.
English language. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's I mean, trying to yeah, the ethnic and racial category is problematic, kind of uh, on a fundamental level, right? Anytime we're dealing with
Yeah.
these kind of social constructs, there's always fuzzy boundaries and stuff. Um, and yeah, people can want to put themselves in more than one, or not know, or yes. Um, yeah. Um, anyway, board composition. Let's see, board size here. Range of board sizes, largely consistent with other co ops. However, on average, worker co ops have the smallest boards of all types of co ops. Um, I would guess that's because we're probably the smallest types of co ops overall. This probably has something to do with that. In worker co ops, the number of current board members ranges from 2 to 42, with a mean of 7 and a median of 5. I bet I know who the 42 is. You know who the 42 is, Chris? Any guesses?
Um, Unicap.
No. Isthmus
Or-
Engineering. I bet
okay.
it's Isthmus Engineering Manufacturing because all of their workers are on the board, even though they have grown to now around 40 members. So I remember Oli saying that. So that number looks like, I bet that is old Isthmus Engineering. Shows to go you, though, you can have a board, whether this is Isthmus or not, with 42 people on it. So um, might seem a little miraculous, but it's possible. We also ask how worker co ops are practicing representative democracy, how many directors they allow on the board. Number of people allowed to serve on worker co op boards ranges from 2 to 13, with a mode of 7. The mode is the most common. So 7 is the most common number for a board. Only 7% of worker co ops reported their bylaws set a range for the number of people that are allowed to serve on the board. Also, kind of an interesting thing if you're writing bylaws for a co op, most of them don't include a specific number of people on the board in the bylaws. 93% do not.
I
Um,
wonder. I wonder if that's. Well, is there any like state law that would kind of set that already, or is that something that the states usually just stay away from? I imagine they just stay away from it. They don't mention that.
yeah, I don't think that would be a normal thing to find in state law. I haven't seen it in any of the codes that I've looked at. That's not something that they specify.
Mhm.
Um, so let's see. Among the 35 participating worker co-ops that elect a representative board, 89% require member approval to change their board size. Um, board size remains relatively consistent. Um, Boy, I'm actually interested about the 11% that don't require member approval to change the board size. That seems like a pretty major decision. I wonder how they make that. Anyway, in the last 5 years, only 3 participating worker co-ops increased the board size, 1 decreased it. Mergers were a key driver for board size changes among all co-op respondents, but were not a factor for worker co-ops. Not real surprising. All 3 worker co-ops that increased the size of their board in the last 5 years cited the following reasons for the change: expanding membership size, increasing board diversity, and adding skills and experience on the board. The single worker co-op that decreased its board size cited a decrease in membership size as the cause. So,
That's what I was. That's what I would
yeah.
think.
Yep. So tenure composition for worker co-op board members, most, well, I don't say 43% less than 3 years, 42% 3 to 9 years, and 9% 10 to 15 years, 6% more than 15 years. So this is good. I like this statistic. Like, that seems there's a lot of turnover. You know, we're not having boards with the same people kind of, running them decade after decade or anything.
But it's okay if all the members are board members.
If all the members are board members,
yeah. Yeah, that's what makes the statistics kind of.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why it took 3 years for them to get it done. All
right.
these like the nuances and.
Well, and if you think about like someplace like Isthmus, they're going to have people who have been on the board since the beginning, so they're like in the more than 15 years. But then they're always, they're regularly adding new members, so you're still going to. Like, it's not clear, from even knowing their board structure, like, where would they show up in this? I wonder what they're. But this is of tenure composition.
This might be a fun.
I'm assuming this is on an individual basis, right? So, yeah. Anyway, so.
This might be a fun document for a statistics student.
Well, so on one board, okay, on average, worker co-op boards are less tenured than CGRI respondents overall. In the average participating worker co-op, 85% of directors have served on the board fewer than 10 years. Okay. In the average participating worker co-op, 85% of directors have served fewer than 10 years. 70% in all CGRI. So okay. So the statistic is about the board as a whole. I'm a little bit confused now. I would assume that you look at the individual, like each individual on a board, how long they've been there. But this seems to be more of a, this seems to be like they're looking at the board as a whole and saying, like, in the average participating worker co-op, 85% of directors have served on the board fewer than 10 years, figure 5, which is, so that would be 85% right here. Add up these less than 3 and 3 to 9. 85% of directors have served fewer than 10 years. Well, maybe, I don't know. Okay, I'm assuming, I don't know. I'd have to make some assumptions to kind of make sense of this pie chart, I guess, now when I really think about it. If they're just looking at all the worker co-ops, all the board members from those worker co-ops, and then how long each of those members has served on the board, that's what I would assume this is representing, but it's maybe not entirely clear. I'm probably
we're giving good ideas for how to specify, communicate these.
yeah.
These investigations
to people outside of the academy who are trying to figure out what you're talking about. So director age, worker co-op boards are also younger than co-op respondents in general. The average worker co-op board is made up of slightly more than half millennials or Gen Z, whereas the average board of CGRI respondents overall is only 25% millennials or Gen Z. So we're a lot younger than the average co-op, which again, I guess is not too surprising, especially since we saw, a preponderance of them springing up in the 2010s, which, as an elder millennial, I suppose, hard as that may be to believe. So half of everybody's younger than me. That's not too bad. Let's see, gender breakdown. Respondents were asked to report the number of board members who are female, male, non-binary, or another gender. Average participating worker co-op board is 51% male, 39% female, 7% non-binary, and 2% another gender. In the most recent economic census of worker cooperatives and democratic workplaces, a national survey of U.S. worker co-ops, participating co-ops reported that 52% of their members are female and 4% are non-binary. This suggests that females are underrepresented and non-binary members are overrepresented in our sample of worker co-op boards. So, yep, we were. So what we need to do here, we got to take like a 2% slice out of the men and a, I don't know, however 3% slice out in bees and give them to the ladies. If you're going to have a overrepresentation, it's not bad. To have it at least be non-binary individuals being overrepresented for once instead of not just the dudes. Okay, so here we go for it.
Yeah, I don't. Hey, modern
gender discourse is confusing.
No, it's yeah. You brought up a good point of discourse. Yeah, what's fair?
I mean,
this is the first time I'm looking at this statistic.
Oh yeah,
I'm trying to wrap my
well,
mind.
so that's a question, right? That's a good question. Like, I mean, because when we're talking about representation, usually it's because we're concerned with fairness, right? And so this, one way to think about fairness. I'm not saying this is the right or the only way. Certainly not the only way. But say, look, if 51% of the members of worker co-ops or 54% of the members are female, then we want like the leadership to reflect the co-op as a whole. And so we would, think that, 54% of should be, female leadership. Now you can obviously that's kind of just a rule of thumb. That's not the end all and be all. You'd certainly imagine a situation in which you had, perfect representation by demographic categories, like all the numbers lined up, and it could still be dysfunctional, right? It's not like that's the perfect thing for fairness. You can certainly have unfair people.
In worker co-ops, is the board like a so-called leadership, or is it just more work? Because
it depends,
right?
It depends. Some of them are definitely leadership positions. Like some of the equal exchange, for instance. Like if you're on the board of directors at equal exchange, you definitely have like more responsibility, but they're a worker co-op. I mentioned them specifically because I know people have worked there and they're fairly hierarchical as worker co-ops go. But then if you're on the board at some small bakery or something, it might not really be that big of a difference. So
that's something that I think I would like to see in like some research. Like, what are the responsibilities of the board members across the different co-ops? Is it I don't know. I mean, I talked to some folks about a different organization, and we were talking about the pros and cons of them being on the board, and kind of like being on the board would actually be inhibiting for a lot of the work, the important work that needs to get done. Just as long as the board doesn't get in the way of the work that the membership needs to do, and it could change over time within the organization. Where, all right, now we need some folks like us on the board. I don't know. It's interesting discourse.
And more on this. So we asked respondents. They say to share the number of directors. We asked them to share the number of directors with Hispanic or Latino heritage in their co-ops. In total, participating worker co-ops reported 52 Hispanic or Latino directors across 72 worker co-ops, with a median of one Hispanic or Latino director per board and a range from 0 to 14. Across the different co-op types in the CGRI sample, consumer, producer, etc., worker co-ops have the highest average share of the board made up of Hispanic or Latino directors, with a median of 1. And then, so apart from that, so this is, maybe you understand, and I never quite understood, like in our demographic categories when I was doing phone surveys, like, you know, white Hispanic, non-white Hispanic, like we had several different categories that all had Hispanic in them, like that was the standard terminology at the time. But nobody else, you know, was broken down like that. And here too, it's like so Hispanic and Latino heritage is broken down on its own, and then they respondents are also asked to provide number of directors from following racial identities: American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, Black or African American, Middle Eastern or North African, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, white, and some other race. Again, sample underrepresents Black and Hispanic and Latino directors compared to the economic census data, where 25% of workers are Latino and 13% Black. So, again, for whatever reason, having a harder time reaching the.
Yeah, see, I mean, it's so.
Non-
So this is the point that I was making earlier, and I guess I'll narrate in like two stories I have. One is something that my uncle told me, where he said, I think it was like in the 70s or something. Uh, his brother told him like, "Hey man, don't call ourselves Mexicans." And that's another thing too, though. Why did we start calling ourselves Mexicans at some point? And first of all, who am I? um, so yeah, I mean, I'm Native American. Um, am I mixed? Do I have any European blood? I don't know. I mean, people and this relates to the story that I'm about to tell. I mean, Native folks, a lot of times we have to assume those identities for different reasons. Just the same way that like I have my last name, we have these Spanish last names because it was easier for the Spaniards to track us by associating us with our masters. But yeah, so my uncle told me this. I think it was like in the 70s or 80s that somebody told them, "Hey man, don't call ourselves Mexicans. Call ourselves Hispanics. That way, the white people respect us more." And my uncle's response was like, "Dude, get it in your mind, man. That's not who we are." But you know, a lot of people do that to survive or whatever. Same thing with the Mexican identity, do to survive. So that confuses things. But then also, what do you do when you have like I know somebody who they're Eastern European and they don't have a drop of they're Eastern European and they're also like Western European too. They don't have a drop of native blood, like native blood from the Western Hemisphere, but they identify as Latin because of that, right? Because
It's
they're
Latin.
Latin. They get to do that
Yeah.
because they got some of the Western
Sure.
they got some Western European blood. So then I'm looking at this as like, so what's really going on here? And then you have people who are from Spain, they call themselves Hispanic too, and then people who
Do they call themselves
Hispanic and Spanish.
Hispanic? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
because Hispanic means of or relating to Spain.
Okay.
And then Spanish, Spain. So is it? So you don't know what it really is. Is it actually more than 83% white?
Yes. Well, I mean, we could go real deep on this, and I could, you know, ask the question like, so who came up with this whole idea about race and blood, like in the first place, by the way, and why have we seemed to adopt that? Like, you know, it's like the whole thing I think is very problematic. Like, so one of my good friends in Missoula, married to a Colombian woman, spends most of his day speaking Spanish, though he lives in Montana because he's just in that community. And he, you know, and I, you know, from hanging out with him and his friends, but what he's told me is like, none of like, I asked him specifically about like, how do people feel about Latinx, like your friends? And he was like, nobody uses that term. Nobody says Latino. Nobody says Hispanic. They say Guatemalan or Venezuelan or Mexican, right? Like that's like, so, you know, there's also that kind of like, okay, somebody came up with the creation of these, like the name of the category, whatever it is. and it probably wasn't the people who were being categorized thusly, right? It was generally some white racist who came up with that term and said, all of you are X. And now, like all these years later, we're like trying to figure out our identities based on these categories that somebody came up with, not for our benefit. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have maybe a little different way of thinking about stuff than about this kind of stuff than a lot of people. But I guess having done some world travel and going over to Southeast Asia, I guess that really kind of made me see like the way that we think about race is very culturally like structured and created. It's not like some natural biological thing. Like obviously there are very different ways of thinking about this stuff. So anyway, but this is how we tend to do it here. Here's what the pie chart looks like. Obviously way too much red in there. So we explored whether co-ops believe they have the right mix of people on the board to govern effectively and how they define the right mix. For many co-ops, the right mix includes board level diversity in several dimensions and how well board demographics mirror those of the members. The 35 participating worker co-ops that elect a board, 63% felt that their board demographics mirror those of their members very or extremely well, compared to just under half of all co-op respondents. Slightly more than half of respondents indicated that their co-op is extremely or very likely to prioritize increasing board diversity in the next 3 years. And the top 3 diversity priorities among worker co-ops, similar to everyone else, are similar to those of everybody else. However, worker co-ops are more likely than other co-ops respondents as a whole to pursue diversity related to race and ethnicity, education level, and international experience, and less likely to pursue diversity of age or geographic distribution. Again, this kind of makes sense to me. Like most, worker co-ops, especially, smaller ones, basically a group of friends on some level starting it. So oftentimes people who share a lot of the same demographics. So you start businesses with, right, who you're hanging out with, who so it makes sense that, around the same age. But increasing the diversity, again, trying to make the board look like the membership as a whole is one of the priorities there. So they say in the next 3 years, what share of participating worker co-ops that plan to prioritize board diversity related to race and ethnicity. So 80% of the worker co-op respondents are thinking about that. And then the next thing followed only by professional skills and experience. Gender is next up, and then educational level. So, outside directors. So here we go. Here's some co-ops have diversified their board in a variety of dimensions, including allowing outside directors. Higher percentage of participating worker co-ops reported allowing outside directors compared to respondents as a whole. Among the 22 worker co-ops that allow outside directors, 13 currently have one serving on the board. And a larger proportion of worker co-ops that elect a board allowing outside directors than those practicing direct democracy. A larger proportion of worker co-ops that elect a board reported allowing outside directors than those practicing direct democracy, i.e. all the members serve on the board. So yeah. The co-ops, that have an outside director are generally also the ones that have elected boards and not just everybody on them. Of the 35 worker co-ops practicing representative democracy, 16 allow outside directors and 10 currently have at least one on the board. So more allow them than actually have them. Although 16% of co-ops, even direct democratic co-ops, were allowing it some outside directorship. So there we go. Now, and I'm assuming that since these are worker co-ops, that those would be non-voting directors, like a pro se board member, as it were. I would guess they don't actually say, is at least
We're
not
giving
yet.
them good stuff to clarify in the next version.
Yeah, exactly. Notes. We've got lots of notes, lots of things we don't understand. Our tiny smooth brains help us out here.
And lots of things that also the respondents are not going to understand too.
Yeah. We asked respondents how confident they were that the board has the right mix of people to govern effectively. And we can see most co-ops are saying that their boards are either very or extremely confident that their board has the right mix of people to govern effectively. So now we get to some juicy stuff here. In addition to the above quantitative measures, participants were asked to elaborate on the right mix of directors during an interview. Among the 21 interviewed participants, 3 were from worker co-ops operating in the service and retail industries. That's not very many. All 3 participants were female, 1 was white, and 2 had other racial or ethnic identities. 1 participant had been with their co-op between 10 and 20 years, and the other 2 had been with their co-op for less than 10. 2 of them were board members and 1 was a manager. Although the interview sample is small, perspectives shared by these participants complement survey observations and offer a more nuanced understanding of governance practices among worker co-ops. Participants perceive the right mix from 3 dimensions: power dynamics, general skill sets, and strategic thinking. A longtime member of a worker co-op that elects a representative board shared that selecting board members from a relatively small membership base has challenged their ability to neutralize power between directors who have served multiple terms and new directors. This composition could limit diversity of thought when experienced directors dominate conversations during meetings. Quote, it sometimes feels like the experienced directors are almost adversarial and the less experienced directors just sit back and watch. That's been a real challenge because we don't have a bigger pool of worker owners. Yeah.
That seems like such a realistic quote that explains a lot of spheres of life.
Yeah. I mean, definitely something. I mean, I've just seen even the worker co-op that I was involved with for a while. They did not. They were brand new, so it wasn't like somebody had been there longer than anybody else. But there's certainly there were those dynamics of some people who were very kind of adversarial and pushy about getting their way, and other people who just kind of would sit back and go along, and didn't work out well for them. Long story short, it's not a great dynamic. So hope whoever this was, they're working on that, but kind of hard to deal with when you only have like 6, 7, 8 people to choose from, or a dozen, or 20 even.
And yeah, I mean, I feel like I wonder if anyone's ever put me in that category of sitting back and watching. Sometimes, like if I'm new to something, like I kind of for a while, I feel like I spend quite a bit of time like analyzing things to try to get an
Mm-hmm.
idea of what's how things relate and all that. I wonder if that's a part of the dynamic.
Yeah. It could be, but one would hope by the time you're on the board, you should have some have some ideas, be past the observation phase.
Right. With the boards, well, I mean, yeah.
I mean, maybe just observing how the board operates and stuff, but it sounds like this is a pretty small co-op, so yeah. Anyway, in comparison with interview participants from a worker co-op practicing direct democracy, in comparison, let me start this again. In comparison, interview participants from a worker co-op practicing direct democracy interpreted the right mix as having employees, and thus directors, with the right technical skills, communication skills, and mindset. One participant highlighted the importance of having skills in facilitation, financial management, and organizational development, and noted that their co-op recruits members with these skills and helps existing members acquire them. So cool. That's I mean I like that a lot. I like that attitude, right? That what they're looking for: technical skills, communication skills, having the right mindset, and then helping people like get trained to be better in those areas, so that they can be good board members. So the worker co-op also prioritizes values alignment by actively recruiting members with specific perspectives. For example, by asking applicants in their cover letter to explain which of our co-op's values resonates most with them and why. Interviews with prospective employees also include questions that try to elicit that information. It should be noted that worker co-ops with direct democracy recruit new members and board of directors simultaneously because of the dual role they perform. For worker co-ops with direct democracy, the right mix may also be viewed as having diverse experiences and a future-oriented mindset that considers potential impacts of current decisions on the co-op's future members. A worker owner at a co-op practicing direct democracy shared that they look for worker owners with a, quote, good variety of experience and understanding that allows us to collectively think into the future about what our membership might look like later and if the decisions we're making could impact that, end quote. Decisions about who to hire and how to prioritize skills, experiences, and values can be difficult and at times contentious. However, participants emphasize that conversations about those decisions have been transformative for our understanding of what workplace we want to create in the future. So, as always, difficult conversations often lead to the best outcomes. So about half are doing direct democracy, about half of the co-ops I talked to, and the remaining 48% are using a representative democracy. Let's see. So here we have the share of participating co-ops that actively encourage members of specific groups to run for the board. And trying to fill out those diversity requirements. Over half. That's pretty good. Identify candidates through networks of current directors. Not something that happens as much in worker co-ops as other types of co-ops. Identifying candidates through networks of senior management. I'm actually surprised that 35% do that. Like networks of senior management doesn't seem like a co-op thing to me, but apparently some of that going on. Recruit candidates from committees or an associate board. Yeah, so looks like for the most part, people are looking for candidates through the current directors and for particular skills. In the past 3 years, 61% of participating worker co-ops that elect a board have not had a contested election. This finding is slightly higher than among all other co-op respondents. Only 4 participating worker co-ops have bylaws that require contested elections. Yeah. I think, if you have a large co-op, that's probably a good thing. If you have a small one, to have contested elections. If you have a small co-op, I don't know, it could get real hard to actually manage. Share of co-ops. Here's what people can vote or how people can vote for worker co-ops. In person at the annual member meeting. Yeah, but most worker co-ops, that's not like I would think where most of the decisions are being made. In person at the co-op, 61%. Online and by mail. So about half of worker co-ops are doing some kind of online voting, which is pretty good. I wonder if that's because we have a lot of tech co-ops. Standard term length for participating in worker co-ops ranges from 1 to 10 years, with the mean of 3 and a median of 2. Oh, wait a minute. Standard term length. Okay, term length for board members. On average, worker co-ops have shorter standard terms than CGRI respondents as a whole. Term limits are rare among worker co-ops. 3 participating co-ops have consecutive term limits, 2 have total term limits, and none have a mandated retirement age for directors. Let's see. Board onboarding. Yeah. This is how you get to how you training your board. I find this stuff boring personally, but I know there are some people who are really into doing this onboarding stuff. What's catching my eye though is the sociocracy. Now, it's interesting. Sociocracy makes it into here at all, which kind of reinforces that maybe my
Well,
thought that
I am
sociocracy is
curious.
being used a lot. Hmm.
So I was looking at the
Yeah.
figure 14. I wonder what the participating in other activities is for how to onboard new members. Hopefully, it's not
Um,
hazing.
oh, I'm sure it has something to do with, yeah, making somebody like lay naked in a coffin and do something sexual, right? No, obviously not. A higher proportion of worker co-ops included other activities in their onboarding than respondents as a whole. Other onboarding activities listed by respondents include owner, attending owner, circle, and or board meetings, taking on a personal project or responsibility, social events, research and education on worker co-ops, and evaluating their individual business plan, if applicable, so that the co-op can fit their individual goals to the co-op strategic plan. Board retreats are another way to onboard directors. Two respondents shared that the new board members attended a retreat where they were welcomed and briefed on the co-op's current business and strategic plans.
I had a wonderful experience where we were planning a retreat and somebody thought that it meant like chilling out. I was like, no, it's just a long work session. Like, oh
Right,
man.
yeah. It's just a meeting that goes on for 3 days. Um, only with more, bullshitting and lunch breaks and stuff. Yeah, interesting. They have a little section on sociocracy. It doesn't seem like it's really tied into the survey much, but yeah, I'm a fan of sociocracy. Use those tools. There's some key differences between the training practices of participating worker co-ops and all CGRI respondents. A higher proportion of worker co-ops reported training board members in meeting facilitation, conflict resolution, and social responsibility, sustainability, and social impact than all CGRI respondents. Other topics respondents disclosed include strategic development, working with an employee advisory board, workplace culture and democracy, power and privilege, history of capitalism, diversity, equity and inclusion, community organizing, and social event planning. So, if that should tell you, worker co-ops might be a little bit different workplace. If you get on the board of a business and you get a lesson in the history of capitalism and community organizing. So, interesting.
They're gonna wake you up.
Share participate co-ops that train board members in the cooperative model. 76%. I guess by the time you're a board member, you probably don't need much training in the cooperative model. I would hope so. Well, although 3/4 are still getting it.
That's good.
Yeah. Financial topics is a big one for training. Board fiduciary duties and responsibilities. Actually, a little bit concerned. That's only 63%. Like, that's an important thing. That's like legal stuff. We need to get that number up. Industry specific topics, ethics and compliance. Yeah, I mean, a little bit
Yeah, I
worrying.
wonder.
Half the people don't have an ethics like training.
I wonder why, like for the financial topics on the board, they're not receiving that. Can they, or maybe just? I wonder if they
I
receive
mean,
it
it's probably,
informally. And that's all they need.
yeah, like nothing, like they don't get any like specific documents or training materials or anything on that specifically. But let's see, conflict resolution and meeting facilitation. Both good ones. I think we all need to, like, everybody should be being trained in conflict resolution. So while we're doing better than other co-ops, only 30% training their board members in conflict resolution. Yeah, I think all worker co-op members should have that. Legal and regulatory issues, not so much. I would guess a lot of worker co-ops probably have fewer regulations to deal with than, say, like grocery stores. Food processors, food handlers, risk management, and other topics. Yeah, although, interesting. So, well, as they said, that there are these certain things that worker co-ops do more training on than other types of co-ops, but most stuff we do less. So maybe there's something we can learn from some other co-ops, or take from them. Although it is always also a matter of time, how much time you have to actually do all this onboarding. Continuity of institutional knowledge. Institutional knowledge, which encompasses the collective information, expertise, and values held by both an organization and its individuals, is equally crucial for board members and employees. Participating worker co-ops are less confident in their systems for preserving board institutional knowledge than all CGRI respondents, but slightly more confident than food co-ops. Less than a third believe their systems preserve institutional knowledge extremely or very effectively, compared to 43% of all other respondents and 23% of food co-ops. So that's here's something co-ops we obviously need to do better on, because that is huge. And I mean, it's easy to see how it can happen. Especially when you have small co-ops, relatively few members, everybody just kind of does their thing. You're not necessarily documenting everything, and if somebody leaves or something
falls
happens
on the others,
and they don't know what that person was doing, or all that institutional knowledge can get lost really easy, which is why you should go on the GEO website and do a search for documentation in worker co-ops and read our interview with Avery about how to do good documentation in your worker co-ops, because that is definitely necessary. It's interesting, though. Worker co-ops are doing better than food co-ops. So on this front, which makes me very concerned for food co-ops. Like they're doing worse than worker co-ops on.
Is it the documents or social actions?
Yeah, I think that's probably it. Avery, last name?
Edenfield?
There you go. Edenfield, yeah. That is the one. So board evaluations, something that apparently worker co-ops do very little of. Overall, board evaluations appear to be slightly more common among worker co-ops than among all CGR, all respondents. Slightly, more common. Interesting. Yet less than a third of participating worker co-ops reported conducting annual evaluations of board committees, board chairs, individual directors, and the board as a whole. While participating co-ops reported lower rates of evaluating the board as a whole, at least every few years, than CGRI respondents, they reported higher rates of evaluating individual board members. Worker co-ops also indicate they use other evaluation practices at a higher rate than CGRI respondents as a whole, which suggests that exploring the unique ways worker co-ops evaluate directors and members is warranted. Yeah. Kind of makes sense. Like, rather than having like a formalized process, it's more like an ad hoc thing with a lot of worker co-ops, right? If a board member is being problematic or somebody's having issues, then that's when it gets brought up, not just in the normal run of things.
Going through this document, though, it is sort of astounding at how much like energy is put into things that like they're regular person at a company, at a capitalist enterprise, is just not going to be doing. Like, they're not going to be putting their energy toward self-management, right? It's all just obeying.
Mm-hmm.
This is a lot of, they're talking about a lot of work that people are engaged in to try to be egalitarian.
Yeah. It's not easy. Yeah, it does take a lot of work. Only 19 worker co-op respondents answered the question about who typically completes board evaluations. Since half of the participating worker co-ops never evaluate their board as a whole, it's not surprising that few participants provide information on who completes the evaluations. Of
Hey
the people
Josh,
who did it, yeah.
so have you ever been at a job where they ask you to evaluate like your manager or any of the higher ups? Did they, I'm not sure I've ever been in that
No,
situation. I know they
no.
evaluate the hell out of me and talk shit.
Yep. Yeah. No. I got evaluations. I never got asked to do one. The only thing I could even think close to that is that in university, where you got to evaluate your professor at the end of the class, um, which I
Right.
think is actually kind of a bad idea a lot of times. But yeah, no, that's a good benefit of being in a worker co-op. You can evaluate your manager as well in a meaningful way. Not just have it go one direction. Um, let's see. Removal of directors who do not fulfill their board responsibilities is a crucial aspect of accountability and governance. This can be a challenging and complex dynamic in worker co ops that include all members on the board, since board service is typically tied to employment, and a director would only be removed if their membership or employment was terminated. Over 2/3 of worker co ops have a formal process for removing underperforming directors, compared to 61% of all respondents. Of those that have a formal process, 40% have removed a director in the last 5 years for underperforming or failing to meet their board or member obligations. That should be a sobering statistic for everyone to keep in mind. Um,
I, I wonder
40% of
how.
everybody has had to remove a director, but only 60% of them actually had a formal process for doing that. Meaning that
Mm,
I hope all of those 40% were the same ones that had the formal process, because if not, I'm sure that was an awful, awful mess. Even with a formal process, it's an awful
yeah.
mess to remove a member. Um,
And I
so,
wonder how much of it could have been prevented as well if all the other training and was in place. Um,
right.
like and maybe it's kind of like maybe it's one of the results of just not having the training.
Yeah,
Hmm,
it'd be
I don't
interesting to
know.
be able to dig into the data for the individual
Hmm.
respondents and see, like, oh, they're the same people who didn't do the onboarding are the ones who are having problems with the removing people or
Hmm.
something like that.
Or that's the very reason why they now have those processes.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Um, so worker co-ops, get your shit together for putting something in your bylaws about removing people. If you don't have it, I'm like, that's shocking to me that there can even be 32% that don't have some kind of process spelled out somewhere. Um, do that, do that before you need to use it. Um, board meetings and decision making practices. A significant portion of the board's responsibilities is carrying out during regular board meetings, hence, it's crucial for meeting and decision making practices to be deliberate and efficient. The survey investigated various elements of board meetings, such as frequency, duration, agenda establishment, facilitation, and allocation of time to different topics. Um, and here, let's see, distribution of board meeting duration by hour among worker co-ops. So most of them 1.5, 1.6 to 2 hours seems pretty good. You got 4 of them that are doing 3 hour plus meetings. Whew. Um, I don't know. I mean, it depends on the type of meeting, I suppose. If you're doing like a typical, like, uh, I don't know, like middle class white people professionalism kind of meeting where it's just on the agenda and talking about stuff, and that would be hell for 3 hours. But if it's more like chill and relaxed and type of meetings we'd have in Nepal with the school board there, where there's lots of food involved, and it just takes forever because there's lots of crosstalk, then it's fine. Um,
I want to know
but
who those people are, and I want to know the nature of those meetings.
yeah, Yeah, you four co-ops that do 3-hour board meetings, 3-hour plus board meetings. We need to know what is going on in your heads when you decided to have a 3-hour board meeting. Okay, proportion of board meetings conducted. 44% doing online only. That's actually kind of surprising for worker co-ops. Again, I wonder if this is due to having lots of tech co-ops that are remote and probably just meeting online anyway. In a mix of online and in-person or telephone, we have 41%. In-person only, 16%. That is crazy low. That's amazing to me. That I guess. I mean, I suppose everybody's doing online or a mix. And then a few holdouts, somebody's still doing like board meetings via phone. Probably one of those worker co-ops that's been around since the 70s, I'm guessing. Board meeting agendas and facilitation. So let's see, who sets the agenda for board meetings? Other is the major one. So other options are board chair and CEO jointly, board chair only, CEO with board chair approval. And so, yeah, people don't really do much of that. It's mostly, this is going to be just the members, right? Examples of other processes cited by respondents include board chair with input from other board members, all members, specific circles or committees, making suggestions. So let's see, who facilitates board meetings? The board chair, only about a third of the time. Most of the other time, it's just other board members. 12% a CEO, some other person. I think this one right here, this option is probably one that's underutilized. I think, like from my experience, I think the best facilitator is always somebody who is just not involved in making the decision, doesn't want to vote, doesn't give a shit what you decide, just wants to make sure you make a good, a decision that fits your values and all that.
And that doesn't feel, maybe feels less conflicted, telling people to stay on topic.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it's hard to find. I mean, this would be a reason to have a non-member person on your board of directors just to do it as a facilitator. Probably hard to find somebody to do that for free all the time. I did it for a couple of years for a co-op. But yeah, I think it's probably a good idea. I should say I didn't do it nearly enough. I should have probably done more facilitation with that co-op than I did. Allocation of time at board meetings. We asked survey participants about the percentage of time devoted to specific topics at board meetings and the ideal allocation for each. More than half of participants reported that the right amount of time was spent on all topics. So we can see the numbers here. All pretty high. People are pretty happy. We might be spending too little time on risk management, though, looks like. And management evaluation, 38% of people saying they spent too little time on that. That might be indicative of something we need to focus on. And member relations might also be a little bit too little. But in all these cases, more people thought that they were spending the right amount of time. So,
other topics. That's having fun.
Yeah.
People joking around, getting to know each other.
Exactly.
You gotta repress the fun.
Yes. No fun till the meeting's over. Boards often reserve meeting time for executive sessions. Let's see, what portion of the board meetings were an executive session? None, 62%. Yeah, that's, very few, some, yeah. So very few and none, by far the most. Executive sessions where, it's kind of a closed door, right? Only, some boards only schedule executive sessions for sensitive or confidential discussions. Others incorporate one to every board meetings as a means of ensuring oversight and independence. Not a fan of executive sessions unless it's something like legal that you have to keep hush hush from certain people. Oh, let's see. Size of participating co-ops with and without a CEO. Let's see. Worker co-ops with a CEO have a mean size of 19 and a median of 2. Okay, wow, that number is really baking my noodle there. The median in the middle, so half of co-ops with the CEO have less than 2 members. That cannot be correct. Okay, I'm a little confused.
Or would it all be no?
With
Would it all
CEO,
be
without
two?
CEO, or are these supposed to be opposite? The median, like half of co-ops have more than that, half of co-ops have less. How can that be 2 of co-ops with a CEO? there must be something with the data. Like there must be not very many, like 2 co-ops with a CEO, and one of them is like the 2-person co-op or something. Because yeah, that number, these numbers don't add up real well.
Hmm.
Mean, median, like yeah, that 2 as a median just does not make sense. Anyway,
Maybe it's
that
supposed
would
to be
be
12.
interesting to see the data. That would actually make more sense. 19 and 12. But yeah, impossible to know what it's supposed to be. CEO tenure in participating worker co-ops ranges from less than a year to 46 years, with a mean of 7 and a median of 4. One worker co-op reported a CEO who started in 2021. That was the study year. Worker co-ops with a CEO have had 1 to 10 different people in that role. So very large range there. Yeah, let's see. So they use specific quantifiable measures to evaluate the CEO's performance. 61% do of all co-ops, only 27% of worker co-ops. That's interesting. Use industry benchmarks to determine CEO compensation. Only 20% do that. That good. Good. We don't need to be using industry benchmarks. I don't think it's a good way to go. Have an emergency succession plan for CEO. Again, only 20% of worker co-ops have that. If you have a CEO, you should have a plan for what to do if something terrible
Hmm.
happens to them or something wonderful happens to them and they just don't show up at work ever again, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Hey, Josh, I gotta hop off, but
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
I'd
we
be
can go.
interested in looking at this again in the future to keep talking about it, though.
Yeah, well, there's plenty here, so we'll do that
We're only on page
next time.
26.
So until then, yeah, we're only on page 26 of 37, so 28. Until then, we will say solidarity to everybody and yeah, keep cooperating. We'll see you next month.